Inshallah, today I wanted to talk about something that in reality is really simple, but for some people it is still a little bit confusing. We are going to talk about the three ways of defining variable in JavaScript. You have var, const, and let, and we are going to see what is the difference between all three of them. As you may know, const and let were defined with ES6. It is always better to use const and let, but there are some use cases in which you may want to use var. So I have defined three variables, var, vo1, vo2, and vo3, and they have these different values, but the value doesn't matter. vo1 is defined with var, vo2 with let, and vo3 with const. If we see inside each one, we can see that the values are identical, meaning that you have a number into vo1, another number into vo2, and another number into vo3. And there is nothing special about them. Let's see what happens if we try to define, for example, it happens a lot that probably when you're working with your code inside a really big project and you have tons of variables, and it may happen that you define two variables with the same name. Obviously, you shouldn't call your variables with vo1 or vo2, but obviously you define two names that are identical and you define different values. For example, here we are defining vo1 and vo2 with 20 and 490, and we're using var. So let's update. So now if we type vo1, as you can see, we don't have anymore the number 20. And as you can see, what happens right now is that vo1, it changes our value, and as we can see, it doesn't say anything. We don't even know that something has changed, but our original value that was 20 was changed into this new value. And this is really bad and can introduce a lot of bugs, and so that is not good at all. Let's do the same thing with let. For example, 5. Let's save. Here, let's update. And as you can see, the first thing that we are able to see is that basically here we see this error that the vo2 variable that we have defined has already been declared. And it is a really simple error, and we can understand it that this error means that vo2 identifier, this vo2 thing, was declared and redeclared 2 times. Here we understand the first difference is that with let, if we define multiple variables with the same name, we get an error, and this is really important, because in this way we are able to track down if we have any error. We are able to understand that we have defined multiple times the same variable, and this is really important because we are able to track down and solve more issues beforehand. Because, for example, if we declare two variables with the same name, we easily can understand that we have declared the same variable and we can change the name easily. In the other hand, if we have used, for example, var, it changes the value silently, so we may know that we have declared the same variable 2 times only after, we don't know, maybe after many days that we have introduced this change, and we may even go further and define multiple variables with the same name, and it can introduce a lot of bugs. So this is good even if we are using let. And here it happens the same thing obviously with const. So it says vo2, but if we change, probably we would see the same error. And as you can see, it is exactly the same error. So okay, so as you can see, with const and let, we have this first difference. So another thing to understand is that the let variable and const variable are block scope. What that means is that, for example, we do an if and is equal to 1, and we put all these variables right inside. Now we, for example, can go here, refresh, and for example, if I type view2, it gives us error because this variable, it doesn't exist, because obviously when we are running this code, when we run it, we are when we run this code, we are basically in the console, we are seeing all the variables that are outside. Okay, so when we type view2 or view3, we are basically like typing window.view1 or view2 or view3. I have spoiled one thing, and as you have probably seen, if we type view1, we can see 20. So, and if we type view2, it says that this variable, it is not defined, because block scoped means that these variables live in the block in which they are defined. For example, here we have defined them inside this block, the if block, and they live here inside. But for var, it is a different story, because when we use var, it gets defined, but it gets defined in the global namespace, and that means that they get defined into window. That is the reason why, for example, we type window.view1, we're able to see 20, and even if we access it outside the if, we are still able to see the view1 variable. Let's save, let's reload. Okay, as you can see, we see 20, but obviously if we type view2, we are not able to see it because it leaves the view2 and view3 variable lives only here inside. So let me do another example. Okay, this ones we can do something like this. So here, for example, if we type console.log, you can guess what we will see here, and let us refresh. We are seeing 10, because when you define a for loop with var, it basically even when the for loop ends, the variable still lives. And obviously here it goes from 1 to 9, and then in the last loop it increments to another one. This way you see 10. You basically are able to see the e variable even after the for was ended, because it the for works here even if we define the brackets right here. But if, for example, we do the same thing with let, refresh, e is not defined because the e variable lives only inside here. Here it is another example that if we define view1 and we do something inside the function, obviously here, since you are not saying where it should get this view1, it is going to read the global namespace, and the global namespace, as we have said previously, is the window object in this case. And what happens and is that when you then call this function, it updates this value here, and here we see 21. Let's see, for example, what happens if we type view1, and what happens when we type view2 and view3. Due to one thing that is called hoisting, or it is the thing that before reading all the variables and things, basically JavaScript hoists up all the variables. It does a first round in which it reads all, for example, the variable declarations or other things, for example, function. That is the same reason why, for example, if you define a function here, for example, you are able to call it at the top, only because due to hoisting. What happens is that it defines, it does a first round in which reads all the variables, variable declarations, and you're able to call them previously. And this is the same reason why, for example, when you type _vo1, the variable vo1, and you console log it, you see undefined, because it reads the variable, it assigns the undefined value, and then if you call it after you are able to get your value, we probably need to delete these ones. Okay, and here if we call vo1 before, we get undefined. If you call it after, we get our value. But if we do the same thing with v2, we are able to see that this variable was accessed before the initialization, and that is another thing. So now that I think that you have a pretty clear picture of how VAR works and why you should basically most of the time avoid it, let's see some difference between let and const. The rule is this one, in my opinion, and it depends, but you should always, most of the time, use const, and only when you need it, use let. Obviously, it depends on you and how you develop things and how you want to develop things. But for example, here, const, if I try, for example, to change the value of const into another value, 200, for example, and I try to console log it, free, update, go here, update. As you can see, I'm not able to do so because const, I'm basically saying that it is a constant and it is something that I should not reassign, and I don't want to reassign. That is not the case for the let variable, because the let variable, it is a type of variable that I define, but probably I'm going to change it in the future. This is the reason why you should define it. Here we can update. As you can see, we have defined the variable v2 with 5, and then we have changed it into 200. We obviously don't have an error because this is the reason why we use let. Since many times when you're defining variables, a lot of times you don't really want to change them, but you want that value, and that is the reason why you are using const on let. And we should use let only sometimes when we really know that that variable it is going to change. Or for example, we can define it as const, but then if we realize that we really want to change it, we can, after getting this error, we can go back and change it into let and update. As you can see, it is working fine. I don't think that it is still the case, but I'm going to say it anyway. If you want, for example, to still use VAR because you still have to support older browsers, obviously you can use something like Babel, and it will transform all these const or let in your target browser. But obviously, I don't think that in these years that a lot have changed. You still want to support all browsers, but you never know. So yeah, it was a really easy and simple tutorial. I hope that inshallah you have learned a lot, and let me know in the comment section if you want to know other concepts like this.